Okay, so this is the last class before the midterm exam next Monday, and I will upload the lecture notes on education as soon as the class is over, when I get to my office. So we'll finish up on education today, and on Wednesday, no in-person class, but you'll still have to log in to the Blackboard Zoom meeting, and I'll be playing a couple of documentaries on Korea. Okay. So education. So we covered these three, right? And today I'll talk about the positive consequences. So we talked about how Koreans are preoccupied with education. So they're both positive and negative consequences, and that those will be the ones we'll be looking at today. Okay, and if we have time, sort of a concluding remarks on the educational situation in Korea. Okay, so the positive consequences. Well, before I show you what I have, can anyone tell me what you think is or are the positive impact of Korean zeal or enthusiasm for education? What have been the positive impact? Anything? It's all been negative? Okay, very good. That should come to your mind right away. Like number one positive impact, I think, has to be its contribution to the remarkable economic transformation of one of the poorest countries in the world as late as the early 1970s to be a top, like a 10th largest economy in the world. So I'll say more than enough when I get to talk about the Korean economic development in week 14. Okay, so and the reason why education is given credit for is the fact that Korea is not endowed with any natural resources to speak of. The only thing Korea is 100% self-sufficient, rice. That's why Koreans are racist, as you recall, right? So, okay, that's one. Anything else? Anyone? No? Okay. I think I'm too easy on this. Sometimes some professors wait a couple of minutes until someone says something, but I'll be a nice guy. Anyway, the first one, as mentioned, the remarkable economic growth or industrialization of Korea. And I'll just say this much. Well, I think I've said it a couple of times, right? How the whole thing is called the miracle of the Han River because it is a miracle. Okay, and so with Koreans' preoccupation with education, there has been no shortage of engineers, scientists, computer scientists, technicians to steer the Korean economy in the right direction. Okay. I thought at least this one someone would say something, and that's the democracy. Okay. So I don't know if you know the political history of Korea, but Korea did not become a democratic country until 1987. Okay. Okay. We did have, people had the right to vote from 1948 until the early 1960, till 1960. But it was still considered a authoritarian regime because the freedom of press was suppressed. freedom of association was suppressed. So anyway, Korea is one of the few countries which achieved both democracy and industrialization. Okay? And the reasoning goes like this. As people became more educated, they became more aware of the importance of freedom, liberty, democracy, and human rights. Okay? So they became more demanding from the government. Okay? So I sort of stopped short of what I wanted to say. So we had a period of authoritarian regime from 1948 to like 1960. And then there was a military coup. And for 2 presidential elections, it was democracy. But then, this guy who carried out the military coup, Park Chung-hee, amended the constitution to be the president of the country forever. So that continued until he was assassinated in 1979, and then another military coup happened. And he was in power until 1987. Okay? So from roughly early 1970s to 1987, Koreans did not have the right to vote. They had the right to vote for National Assembly members, but not for the president. The president was chosen by an electoral college comprising about 2,000 cronies of the president. It was like North Korea. Okay? But again, in 1987, the democracy was restored, and it was possible because there were endless demonstrations by especially university students and also laborers, okay? Especially the university students, okay? So that's why this education is closely tied to Korea's democratization and also sort of a mature democracy, okay? And another thing is, under the authoritarian regimes, which lasted again from 1948 till 1987, Koreans were indoctrinated in the ideology along the line of ask not what your country can do for you. Is this something you're familiar with? This was something that was mentioned by John F. Kennedy in his inaugural address. But this makes sense if you are living in a poor country, because your country, your government is too poor to do anything for you. But if you live in a rich country like Korea, this doesn't make sense, because you got to make demands to your government what your rights are, because they have the money, right? So I'm, for example, not happy when the Korean government spends so much money on the military. Yes, we have a belligerent North Korea, but I think we're overspending. The money could be better spent helping the poor so that the suicide rate could be halved, right? For example, that's one example I'm talking about. So it is a good time to introduce you to these 3 rights. You see, citizenship in a democracy, especially a well-to-do country, carries 3 rights. See, the rights you're most familiar with are these 2, civil rights and political rights. But did you know that you also have these social rights? You have that, it's a right. Right to education, right to medical care, and right to welfare benefits if you happen to be poor. That's your right, as important as your human rights. But why is it that everyone is so hung up on civil rights, political rights, and human rights? But you got to know this, okay? Social rights is as important as political rights, civil rights, and human rights. That's my personal opinion. And a lot of Koreans are, so I think Koreans tend to be very demanding when it comes to the government, right? And I think it's not a bad thing. Okay. All right. So that's two. And number three, Koreans' zeal for education prompted the Korean government to invest relatively heavily in education. So, I mean, if you compare Korean spending, Korean government spending on education in comparison to other industrialized nations, it may not be as much. But I'm talking about how the Korean government spent a large proportion of its annual budget even when it was poor, because it realized that that people's demand for education was high, right? So anyway, what's so this is something I think many Koreans are proud of. Where sorry for making a comparison with the U.S., but in Korea, education is practically a national, it's under the national administration, meaning no matter where you live, students are entitled to the same level of education, technology, textbook, everything. So you know how, I don't know if it's the same in other countries, but I can only make comparison with the US because that's something I'm familiar with, where depending on a district you live, and if you happen to live in a well-to-do district, because education is funded partly by the property tax of the district you live, the students living in well-to-do districts have so-called better teachers, better school classroom, like computers, software, whatever the case may be, or the number of students per class, all differs, right? But in Korea, we have equivalent levels of resourcing and support, no matter where you live, whether you're in the most well-to-do district or you're living in a small village, okay? So that's why even the World Economic Forum has released this report that Korea has the most equitable public education system. So this is separate from how Koreans spend so much money on private education, okay? This is talking about formal schooling, okay? So again, Korea is getting recognition for the fact that there is no discrimination just because you happen to live in a village or live in a not so well-to-do district. Okay, every student is entitled to the same level of support from the government. Okay, and because of the such strong support from the government, and also maybe because of the declining fertility rate, but you can see how the number of students per class in elementary school, for example, has just, you can see a major decline, right? From 1963 to 2020. And this is how a classroom looked like in the 1970s. Over 60 students, and some schools had morning classes and afternoon classes, comprising different sets of students, that is. Okay? But now that's a typical classroom look. Okay? And also, Korea achieves a top score in the World Bank's Human Capital Index. With one being a perfect score, Korea ranks very high. Fourth, this is fourth, right? Yes. In achievement score in international assessments, Korean students have performed well. The most widely recognized and perhaps the only international assessment of student aptitude is the Program for International Student Assessment, PISA, by the OECD. In view of helping countries to improve their education policies and results, the worldwide study measures the scholastic performance of 15-year-old students in 3 subjects, namely reading, mathematics, and science. In the 2018 PISA, which assessed performance by 600,000 participating students, Korea was ranked 5th overall with the following specific ranks: mathematics 7th, science 7th, reading 9th. Okay? So here's a graph. And some may say, and I think they're right to point this out, it's 5th best, but at what cost? Or, Koreans spend so much time studying, and yet their score is only that. Some critics like to argue. Okay? So, again, I'll be talking about the negative consequences where I share with you how much time Korean students spend studying. Okay? I'll talk about this later. Okay, 5th positive impact. It's so because Koreans are so. Remember how Korea has like the top 10 largest number of universities in the world, right? And has created a lot of jobs. Okay. While job creation due to expansion of tertiary education is a universal phenomenon, jobs created by the huge private education market in Korea is unique. Okay? The Korean private education market reportedly accounts for more than 10% of the employment of Koreans with a college degree. Okay? So the government's hands are tied, meaning if they wanted to do something drastic like banning or prohibiting or closing down all the private academies, they cannot do that because they account for so many jobs. And there are reportedly around 100,000 hagwon. Okay? That's private academy or cram school in Korea. The Gangnam district alone, a mecca of private education, is believed to be home to some 30,000 private academies. Okay, one more. 6th positive impact of Koreans' sort of preoccupation with education is that, well, I don't know if you would agree with this. I think we do have data. I think if maybe after class I'll look this up if I could find any data on this. That Korean teenagers engage in less antisocial behaviors like drugs, crimes, gang activities, deviant acts. Is this an agreeable point of view, you think? Well, since you could not hang out with like Korean high school students, you probably could not really agree or disagree, but at least from what I know, this is true. Yes? So you want to include suicide? Okay. Well, see, that will be under negative consequences, suicidal behavior. Okay, so, but that's why I didn't maybe include suicidal behavior, but I think just looking at, well, I guess, it all depends on how you define antisocial behavior. If suicide is included, then there you have to say except for suicides. Okay. Oh, I see. Mm, okay. Well, I'll somehow put it somewhere along the line of again, if not here, it's in the negative consequences. Okay. Anyway, um, well, before we move on to the negative impact of Koreans' obsession with education, can you think of any other positive impact that I didn't include, but you think that I should include? Positive impact. No more? All right. Negative impact, longer list than positive impact. Um, well, I think the negative impact of Korean education, ZIL, happens at three levels. Okay. First is at the parent level. Okay. Second, students themselves, and third, society. Okay. Well, under parents, what am I talking about here? How do parents sacrifice themselves because of Koreans' obsession with education? So well, can anyone think of any response? Maybe you're thinking too hard. The point I'm trying to get at is this. Parents make sacrifices because they have to spend money on their children's private education. Now, how many of you or how many of your parents did they have to spend like $400, $1,000 a month for your private education? And what country are you from? US. Wow. And it was not. No. So you should not include tuition. It should be just outside formal schooling. See, 학원 is place you go after school. Okay, so you were referring to your private education because you went to a private school. You see, when you look up data on private education, don't get fooled by, let's say, 30% of French students have private education. They are referring to just what you just said. They're referring to the proportion of students who go to private schools. But see, Korean private education is so different. It's really outside the formal schooling. Okay? So, well, parent sacrifice is really about the extra spending they have to educate their children. And here we go. And that is also closely tied to how high proportion of Korean students take private lessons. Now, just for fun, what percentage of elementary and secondary students in Korea do you think take private lessons? Just take a guess. 70. Did someone say 90? Well, you both are close. Here we go. This is last year. A whopping 78.3% of Korean students in primary and secondary schools were taking private lessons. And that's the highest ever. Okay? And as the following data show, it wasn't always like this. So our society is becoming less livable, I think. Because look at this. In 1980, only 14.9% of students in elementary and secondary schools were taking private lessons, but it started to increase. Look at this. In 1991, the proportion jumped to 20.8%. 1999, 56.9%. And 2010, 73.6%. So I think this is a very key rates to know about, because again, without these historical figures, you probably would have thought that this Korean students' participation in private education has always been like that, right? But again, data prove that it is a recent phenomenon, and it's simply getting worse, okay? So there you go. This is a graph showing how back in 1980, only 14.9% of elementary and secondary school students were participating in or taking private lessons, but it's up to 78.3% as of last year, okay? And another fun question, what level of students do you think will have the highest participation rate in private lessons? See, a lot of people say high school, right? No. It's elementary. As an experienced parent, I'll tell you this much, why this is the case. When you have babies, when you have a small child, and everything they do is a marvelous. And you sort of have this really hope or wish that your child is a genius. So I think at the elementary level, every parent is hopeful that he or she will be a good student. But by the time they reach high school, they pretty much know how good or how not so good their children are, okay? In terms of academic performances, okay? So this is the breakdown. So the elementary students participating in private education has always been the highest among the three levels of education. In terms of private education expenditure, for which subjects did Koreans spend the most on, let's say last year? Well, this was, well, not a surprise. It's, believe it or not, English. Okay? Is it because Koreans want to learn English so that they could travel the world? No. English accounts for a major proportion of one's sort of aptitude. You know, when universities look at students' sort of aptitude, they look at a few key areas, right? And they're all there: English, math, Korean. But English tends to get is more weighty, I think, in many admission criteria. And Korean children are subjected to private education from early on. This is from 2016, and I hope you don't generalize, but it's simply amazing. Okay? So here we go. This is from 2016. For 2-year-olds, 35% were taking private lessons. Well, maybe you should ignore this because it's just too much. I just cannot imagine how this could happen. But this is quite acceptable. Okay, 5-year-olds, pre-kindergarten children taking private lessons, and what subjects are they involved in? Korean, phys ed, art, science, and others, and that others include English. Okay. And this is also for 5-year-olds, similar trend, okay? So, given the high participation rate in private education, Korean parents spend a lot of money on private education. Again, private education here means spending on cram school, outside formal education, okay? And in 2022, you know, I will just jump to the next one, okay? This one includes non-participating students. So, but they always release this figure, okay? So I think this one it makes more sense. This one is an average spending per student a month, okay? Just taking into account students who actually take private lessons, okay? And how much is this? And, you know, right now, $1 is about 1,300 won, okay? But I don't want to go with that because exchange rate is exchange rate, okay? But that I would go with $1 and at the exchange rate of 1,001, okay? Because that's more like what you know, Koreans spend, okay? So as of 22 last year, Koreans on average spent over $500 per student a month. And I'll be showing you later how this is grossly underestimated. Okay? There's a problem of Korean parents underreporting. Because do you think Korean parents will proudly say, oh, I spend $2 million a month? Not $2 million. 2 million won, or $2,000 a month on my child. You think Koreans would do that? No. They would always say, oh, you know, my kids, you know, they're doing so well, I don't need any private education, kind of, right? They sort of, anyway. So this is monthly expenditure. So the participation rate is lower for high school students, but the spending is the highest, okay? So again, we're talking about per high school student, Korean parents spending almost $700 a month, okay, on private education. Okay? And spending on private education varied widely depending on the student's residential area and the level of education. And of course, Seoul, right? If you lived in, so the students living in Seoul, they spend the most, okay? Because it's the most expensive and it's also most competitive, okay? And of those living in Seoul, the average monthly private education expenditure per student soared to $937 a month. Okay, I'm missing. It's high school. Okay, I'm missing high school here. Okay, per student, average monthly private education student for high school students rose to $937 a month. So to rephrase, this is where you spend the most money. If you have a child living in Seoul who is a high school student, you spend the most. Okay, and that's at $937 a month, almost $1,000. In most countries, spending on private education, that is spending on education outside formal schooling, is almost non-existent. Yes or no? Outside formal schooling, after school, okay? However, Korean families with children reportedly spend between 10 to 30% of their income on private education. For example, the median income for a household of 4 in Korea in 2022 was over 5 million won. Okay? Let's say $5,000. Average private education expenditure for a family of 4 with 2 high school students was over 1.3 million won. Okay? Which is about 27% of the family income. Okay? So if you ever wondered why fertility rate in Korea is so low, all right, it's this. And let's say you spend this much money on your children. Are they guaranteed admission to top universities? No, because well-to-do families spend a lot more than this. Okay? And the best hagwon are the ones who teach the kids the best ways to excel on exams. Okay? Anyway, I'm gonna skip the next few slides because it's about how the figures I've shared with you, they're not accurate. Okay? They all argue, and I sort of have to agree. Do you know how much it costs to send your kid to one hagwon for one subject? It's $400 a month. And typically, you know, parents send their kids to 2 or 3 hagwon, right? So how could they come up with a figure of like $400 a month or $500? So, so they take issue with that. Okay. And last point about the you know, the high spending on private education is really this. Okay, I don't know if you could see, but this is the monthly income. All right, so 3 million won, or $3,000, and so on. Right, so the highest income bracket is those making 8 million won a month, or $8,000. Okay, and the participation rate is 88.1% for the high income family, whereas for the low income family it's only 57.2%. Now the yellow bar is the amount of spending per month. Okay, so the high income family spend on average $640 per student, whereas low-income family spend only $150 per student. Okay, so that there's that educational inequality there. Okay, and again, this is just an average. And remember the fallacy of average I talked about before. Okay. And I want to just share with you some pictures where parents are, you know, are as stressed out as students themselves in the hope of getting admission to good universities. And yes, there is no meditation there. It's all about praying to Buddha to have your wish realized. And I showed you this before, right? So this is during the writing of aptitude test. Okay. Every country has private education, but the phenomenon of private education in Korea is exceptional for at least a couple of reasons. One is self-telling. The participation rate is very high. So as I mentioned earlier, if you see a figure of like, 50%, 30% in some poor countries, it's a reference to the proportion of students going to private schools, okay? Not hagwon, okay? So anyway, Korea has the highest participation rate in private education, okay? Private lessons. Second, the purpose of receiving private education in Korea is different. How is it different? Students in other countries usually take private lessons to keep up with schoolwork or for learning arts and music and maybe taekwondo, right? But Korean students do it to excel or get ahead in class. And uh, and I think we have this really terrible disease where students are taught subjects one semester or 1 year ahead. So let's say you're in grade 10. Typically, you go to Hagwon and they teach you stuff that's at least sometimes, I think, even 2 years ahead. Okay? So that's why when you go to school, what do? When the teacher is teaching you all the stuff you know, you sleep. Okay? And a good thing I'm not a teacher. See, nobody in this classroom is doing this, right? If I saw that, my God, I'll just walk out. Can I do that? No. All right. So that's parents' sacrifice. Okay, with such high rate of participation rate in private education and all the spendings that I shared with you, and from my own experience, I have 2 kids, right? And I think I spent at least $1,000,000 per child a month. Okay? And that's not a lot. That's just sort of keeping up with the Joneses. Okay? And anyway, now student sacrifices. Now, can anyone tell me, other than their suicide or suicidal thoughts, anything else that negatively affects Korean students? Yes. Yes. Mm. Oh. Okay. Mm. Okay. I think that's an excellent point. Parents, in addition to their financial commitment, their life is pretty much centered around the kids' education. So I think I mentioned before where from when my daughter, for example, entered junior high, that's when our family vacation stopped. Okay? Because everything we had to do in accordance with her schedule. And she had to go to, all the hagwon during the winter break, summer break. So there was no time for us to, go to family vacation. And also, my wife definitely did everything to make sure that she had all the comfort that she needed to just focus on education, right? So thank you. All right. Anyone else on the parents? And I think parents also feel the stress, right? The depression. Some parents may do actually suffer from depression, which I'll talk about under students. But anyway, let's, so that we don't run out of time for today. First, too much study time. And now ask yourself, when you were junior high, how much time did you spend studying? That is outside schooling, outside the classroom. When you came home, how much time did you spend studying? Well, I could tell, for me, none. I think I studied only when there was an exam. Maybe so I would spend 1 week before the midterm exam, final exam, to prepare. But other than that, homework, I did not do. You won't believe this when I say this, right? I was not a good student. I still remember my biology class where, every class he would ask every student a question with a picture of certain body parts, and we're supposed to, and he would point something, and we would have to answer what that is, right? Every time he did that, he skipped me because he knew I wouldn't have the answer, right? Uh, I was not a good student. I hung out with all the bad crowd, I had I wore torn jeans. I wore a jean jacket that said Black Sabbath, and I had a long hair, and I had these glasses that were broken, where it should turn black only, when I go outside, but it stayed black even inside. Can you imagine this guy sitting at the back with torn jean, not smiling or anything, with sunglasses, basically, right? So I was, well, what can I say? I was so bad. Somehow I made it to university. I continued my bad way as a sort of a non-serious student, right? Guess what happened? In my first year of university, I failed 9 out of 10 courses. So what happened? I got kicked out. But I was so ashamed. I didn't tell anyone. I left home every morning pretending I was going to school. And I did go to school because at the time, once you get a student card, it was good to enter library just by flashing it, without any barcode. Just flash it, you walk in, take a space in the library, and you just hang out. But it sounds like fun right now, but it was the hardest time for me, that 1 year. But it changed my life. Because for the first time, I reflected on what I need to do with my life and what I want to do with my life. So that's why taking time off from whatever you do is a good thing. Okay? So don't be rushed. See, I always like to say this. Chasing your dream is good, but being chased by your dream is terrible. Okay? So chase your dream, but don't be chased by your dream, and take some time off. Go travel. Okay? And I think I really laud all the exchange students who have come all the way to Korea to study, because it's not just about studying, right? It's about experience. One thing I regret the most about my university days is that I didn't go on exchange program. Okay? So Korean students, if you're listening, you've got to go, because this is the only time you could really go and experience and enjoy. So you may go, I could do that maybe when I'm 40-year-old, whatever. It's different. And going any place with your family is different. And it's usually a service, not something that you really get to enjoy and experience, right? Anyway, I got sort of sidetracked. But anyway, here we go. As of 2022, study time for high school students outside of school during weekdays amounted to 2 hours and 40 minutes a day. Okay? And I'll bet you any money that nobody from outside of Korea has done this, right? That's just an average, right? And for high school, so Saturdays, even more. Sunday, even more. Study time for middle school students outside of school were as follows. Weekdays, 2 hours and 41 minutes a day. Saturday, 2 hours and 37 minutes. And Sunday, 2 hours and 18 minutes. Okay, so I think without really looking at data, just ask yourself, how much time did I spend studying when I was a middle school student or high school student, and you'll see how this is just too much, right? And because Korean students spend so much time studying, there are countless number of study rooms, study cafes, reading rooms in practically every large neighborhood. Okay? It looks like this. This is in the apartment complex. Okay? I would say every apartment complex has a study room like this. Okay? So you pay like a $1 or $2 to use it. And anyway, study cafes look like this, and it's open 24 hours. Okay? The one on the right side, more private, right? Second negative impact, myriad of private lessons after school. Korean children are pressured to take countless number of private lessons after school on weekdays and on weekends. So this is something I have a problem with. Again, I dug up as much data as I can. Can you believe this? That only, for example, high school students spend only 6.6 hours taking private lessons per week. But this is the only data that I could share with you. So maybe I didn't do my homework of digging up more data, but this is what I have. But anyway, whatever the hours you see are the extra hours Korean students do spend studying. Okay? One thing that I want to show you is that in Seoul, at least, cram schools have a curfew of 10 o'clock. Before, they studied past midnight, so the Seoul municipal government thought that that was too much, so they have a 10 p.m. curfew, but you know they are known to break the law by doing it secretly. Okay. Even if you don't read Korean, you can see how sort of this writing is not neat writing, but one of stressed out. It just sort of shows you how the child who wrote it in elementary school is sort of this burdensome private education is just too much, right? And any sort of a location where there is a group of like a concentration of hagwon, this is what you see at night at 10 o'clock. All the buses are there to pick up the students to drive them home. And you don't see them, then there will be so many cars being lined up where the mothers would typically come and pick their children. Okay? And see, I tried very hard to find pictures like this where you do have teachers actually giving instructions or lessons or lecturing, and some students are just, you know, don't care and napping. Third, lack of playtime. So, well, this applies to all levels of students, right? I think playtime is something you need even if you're in your high school, right? But see, if you didn't think about how important playtime is, well, here it is. Having a playtime is a way for children to learn about the world, and learning about the world means so many things, including social skills, emotional training, creativity, language development, body movement, and more. Right? You would all agree, right? Because without you knowing, you do get to learn about the rules of the game and so on. Not necessarily sports, but just playing, right? So children also learn about the potentials and limits of their abilities by constantly testing their possibilities. So if children don't experience the world enough through play, the abilities they are expected to have as adults can be greatly diminished, including low interpersonal communication skills. Can you think of any other negative consequences of not having enough playtime? Anyway, yes. Okay. Mm, I think that's a good one, right? You don't have time to develop a hobby, right? And since she mentioned hobby, I think everyone should really find a hobby to enjoy, because ultimately you do spend a lot of time alone, okay? And that should be focused on something you really like to do, right? And as you may have guessed, for me, it's music, and reading about music as well. So find a hobby and enjoy your life. All right. Any other negative impact that you could think about because of the lack of playtime? Anyway, since I have to move on, I want you to really think about the importance of playtime. Okay? Even in your adulthood, I think you cannot just do something that is productive and constructive, right? I think just taking time off and relaxing and enjoying whatever is very important. Fourth, lack of sports activities. The importance of engaging in sports activities include learn the rules of the games, experience of winning and losing, glories and defeats, etc. all lead to character building. Okay? And in Korea, I think winning and losing is all pertaining to what university you enter, sadly speaking. Okay? Okay, another thing for you to think about. Okay, what are the other positive impact of engaging in sports activities? Fifth, sleep deprivation. A study from last year finds that Korean students suffer from sleep deprivation. The average total sleep time for elementary students is 8.7 hours a day. Middle school students, 7.1 hours a day. And high school students, 5.8. Now, without any recommended sleep time, you will not be able to guess whether it's enough time or not, right? And this is a recommendation from the US government. The recommended sleep time by the US government are these. Elementary school students, 6 to 13-year-olds, 9 to 11 hours. So elementary school students in Korea doing not bad. They're close to a minimum average, but not so well for the rest. The middle school students, 8 to 10 hours. High school students, 7 to 9 hours. So Korean high school students suffer the worst in terms of sleep deprivation, because they only sleep 5.8 hours a day on average. 6, negative impact on Korean students is the mental health. Parents' obsession and society-wide education frenzy are easily felt by the students who are believed to suffer from various mental problems, especially by those who are not performing well at school, including all these: feelings of guilt and anxiety, anger or frustration, and so on, and also insomnia. Okay? Now, I sort of highlighted the last two because I have some more to say about these two. Okay? Low self-esteem. And I think this is really something that bothers me. Okay? See, in an ideal world, if you're an A student, you should be happy. Okay? But in Korea, you're not, because you're not an A plus student. Okay? Is this universal phenomenon or is something uniquely Korean? For example, Korean students at KU, shouldn't that be feeling to be at the top of the world? Because they're at one of the most prestigious universities in Korea? Guess what? Some are not happy. Why? Because they tried to get into SNU, they tried to get into Yonsei University and couldn't. And that's a fact. Not for all KU students. I'm saying for a significant number of KU students, they have that misgiving. And that's hurtful. Okay? And some KU students to this day, they are trying to transfer to other like better universities and programs. Okay? And I think that's rather unique, at least in comparison to Western countries. Okay? And you know, when it comes to like having all these facilities to help the physically handicapped and all that, we're almost there with Western standards. But I think, you know, when it comes to being considerate of people who are not so well performing at school, I think we come last. We're just very callous, very cruel, and we openly say things like, you're stupid because you're not good at school, right? And I think that's terrible. And as someone who was not such a good student, you know, it makes it's much more personal than for others, I would say. And because of all this, being good at something else does not count. Okay, if you're a school-aged a child, then the education is the only thing that should matter. Nothing else counts. Okay. And depression. Okay, and we call it depression experience rate, and it refers to the percentage of individuals who felt so unhappy or depressed that they stopped going about their daily activities for 2 weeks in the last 12 months. Now, to this definition, I don't know how many of you have experienced that. I could tell you right now, never in my lifetime. Okay? And I'm sure most of you would say the same thing, right? Again, for 2 weeks, you're like totally could not do anything. You really cannot meet people. You're maybe sometimes in tears, but just feeling so down, right? It's 2 weeks in a row. But look at the proportion of Koreans who have experienced this in the last year. In 2022, 1/3 of Korean students in middle and high school students had this depression experience. Okay? Male students, it's down to 24%, but that's still very high. And why do you think they were depressed? Was it because of drug? Because of love relationship? Studies show it's always study related. Okay? Number one reason, or number one cause. 7. Korean students' low level of satisfaction, and it's understandable. This is from 2015, but you can see how, you know, I'm sure just for the non-Korean students, wasn't it fun when you were in high school? Yes, it was for me. Although I was not, again, not a good student, I was partying on weekends, uh, listening to music, watching television, watching movies. Fun. But how many Korean students could say that when they're in middle school or high school, right? So that's why Korean students, uh, show very low level of satisfaction. Okay, so only little over half of the students said they're happy with their life. But look at the OECD average. It's whopping 84.8%. 시간이 어떻게 돼요? 10분. Okay. Eighth, low social skills of Korean students. So I'm just showing you all there so that I can move on quick. So this is sort of outdated, but I think nothing much probably have changed. Okay, so in assessing social skills like relationship orientation, social cooperation, and conflict management, Korean students average just 0.31 out of 1 in the assessment of social skills, and it was 35th out of 36 countries. Okay? So it's easily imaginable, because if they spend all their time just studying for exams and trying to excel in exams, their skills in other areas suffer, right? And this is shown in this particular survey. Ninth, and this is the last one, before I turn to the societal impact, suicide. And I mentioned this when I first talked about education, and I got the figures wrong. I think I said something like 800, right? It was actually like 300, which means almost every day there is one suicide committed by a student between the age of 10 to 19 in Korea. Every day there's one such casualty, okay? And the suicide rate of those between the age of 10 to 19 in 2020 increased by 10% from the previous year, marking the largest jump ever, okay? So look at the nice graph here. And typical reason, so almost 40% said academic problems, and 25% anxiety about the future, which is related to one's educational performance. So whopping about 2/3, okay, of the students identify educational pressure as the reason that they think about suicide, okay? Or those who had suicidal thoughts, that's the number one concern. So here we go, suicide rate by age groups. 10 to 19, it's only 7.1, but it's been rising, okay? You can see how it has risen. Why? Because look at this. Oh, it's the same. Overall, it wasn't always that bad. In 1983, this is the first year that the Korean government has collected data on this. It was only 8.7, but it has risen, and our record is 30.17 out of per 100,000 population. And I think I'm missing this. Oh, okay, this one. All right. So 7.1 per 100,000 population between the age of 10 to 19. Okay. Okay, we'll jump to the last one. Negative impact of education fever on society is, of course, low fertility rate. Okay? In other countries where the participation rate in private education is high, like Japan, Singapore, Taiwan, look at their fertility rate. So all the Confucian cultures which emphasize education and also have high participation rate in private education all have low fertility rate. Is that just a coincidence? It's not. It's not just the cost, but it also the mental cost, right? Because it is so stressful. Okay? Okay. Thank you. I'll end here. Okay?